In this life, you have to endeavor to achieve anything. But there's a point where you're going on a path where there's so many obstacles, where endeavor turns into over-endeavor. You'll be able to know by a few things. The first thing is if your mental and physical health begins to decline. If you're trying to do something and you're coming across so many difficulties, so many obstacles, or you're trying so hard that is causing your physical and mental health to decline, then probably it's not meant to be your journey. The second way that you'll know is if the result of that endeavor and those difficulties, your relationships and your sense of connection with people around you is declining. The third way you'll be able to know what will happen is you'll become so fixated in achieving something that you'll lose sight of the bigger reason why you're even trying to do that. And so you'll find this often happens with people, that they get so attached to doing something, and then what happens is they get so into it that they lose sight of why they even begun that journey in the first place.
And without further ado, I think we should actually get going. We have 4 themes, kind of broad themes of questions for tonight. And so the way we're going to do this is I'm going to ask a few questions from each of those themes. And then after that, I'll open it up to the audience. And they can ask questions on these themes as well. So the first theme is about kind of spirituality and the real world, like your careers, your education, and so on. So you, of course, studied information management. I know that you somewhat enjoyed that course, maybe not towards the end. But after doing that, you pursued a very different career to what many of your peers would have done. You decided to take the monastic lifestyle, go to a monastery, train up in monk life, and that seems quite a different journey. It seems like a journey of disconnecting from the world. So have there been any experiences where you thought, you know, these lessons from spiritual life that I've learned in the monastery are actually really applicable, not just in the monastery, but also in the world for students, in their careers and their education?
Yeah. So I guess I'll just comment on a few things you said. The first thing you said is, I left the real world. And I think that's an interesting question, that what is the real world? And I think that's the very thing which kind of fueled me to begin exploring spirituality, because I was living in a world which I was told was real, but to me felt very superficial, to me felt like very temporary and transitory. And to me felt like a world which didn't necessarily fulfill people in the deepest way. And therefore I was immediately kind of curious to know, is there something beyond this world? And perhaps this world isn't the real world. And perhaps there is a world beyond this world. And perhaps right now we're just living in the Matrix. And I welcome all of you to challenge that yourselves as well, that what is the real world? Because I think sometimes we just accept things as real, sometimes we just accept things as normal, sometimes we just accept things that this is the way it is because we've just been taught that throughout our life. So yeah, maybe it's a good question. What is actually the real world? But yes, I did leave the real world and I became a monk. And yeah, I guess in ancient spiritual culture, actually everyone lives as a monk for a certain period of their life. Because when you live as a monk, then you learn certain qualities, you learn certain character, you learn certain techniques and a certain lifestyle and a certain mindset that can help you then to be successful in whatever you may wish to pursue in your life. So for example, we learn sense control. We learn mind control. I can control your mind. Control our own mind. We learn how to connect with people, how to have deep relationships. When you live as a monk, you live communally, and that helps you to understand how to develop tolerance, humility, how to actually connect with people and understand how to hear the unheard and empathize with people. You obviously learn wisdom as a monk, and that wisdom helps you to decode everything that you're going through in life, the challenges, the ups and downs, and see deeper lessons in it. So like that, in ancient spiritual culture, everyone spends some time disconnecting from the world and deepening their spirituality, because the things that you learn actually then empower you to be successful in whatever you may then try to pursue in your life.
You mentioned that it's important to not just be in the world, but also deepen your spirituality. Now, spirituality is a concept that I'm sure many of us have heard, and the word's been thrown around in a variety of contexts. Maybe if you ask someone in the audience, they'd say spirituality is crystals, or, you know, some kind of, I don't know, tarot card reading. Someone else might say spirituality is about like seeking the truth. So what does it mean to deepen one's spirituality? What is spirituality?
I would say three things. Spirituality means to understand, is there something beyond this life? Is there something beyond this world? And is there something beyond this body and mind that I have? Anything which helps you to understand the answers to those questions is basically helping you to develop your spirituality. And the people who are able to answer those three questions, is there something beyond this life? Is there something beyond this world? And is there something beyond just the body and mind that I deal with every single day? Those individuals live on a significantly higher level of awareness and consciousness, and they can then unleash incredible untapped potential to do extraordinary things in their life.
For students that are trying to balance kind of spiritual ambition, so understanding what's beyond life, what's beyond the world, what's beyond one's own mind and senses, but also trying to find maybe a career in this world. Often those things seem quite contradictory, right? I mean, the corporate life that we see, climbing that corporate ladder, the world is quite cutthroat. I know if people go into the world of finance, which I hope many of you do, that world is quite difficult. It seems to be motivated by greed. And spirituality is all about humility, and it's about kind of being kind and dealing with other people as humans, whereas the corporate life seems to be a lot more about being very cutthroat, being very direct and somewhat rude and exploitative. So how can we balance these kind of spiritual ambitions with our career goals and career prospects?
A spiritualist knows how to use everything to accelerate their journey towards their spiritual perfection. We're surrounded by greed, by materialism. People seek power, people seek money, people seek position, popularity. But we can pursue all of those same things, but for a noble cause. And so a spiritualist, instead of being overwhelmed or frustrated or kind of turned off by all of those things, what they instead learn to do is they learn how to pursue those things and then utilize them for creating beauty in the world. And therefore, I would say that when a spiritualist sees the greed and the materialism of the world, that doesn't make them want to turn away from the world, but what it makes them want to do rather is go back into the world and be an agent of positive change. And to say, I'm going to be in that arena and I'm going to utilize everything in that arena, but I'm going to do it in such a way that I actually uplift consciousness and make a positive change to the world around me. And so I think you can be ambitious, you can be successful, you can be powerful, you can be rich, and still be incredibly spiritual, because your motivation and your intention is on a significantly higher level.
So if I've understood you correctly, you're saying we're not just as spiritualists trying to go and necessarily become averse from the greed and the negative things of the world, because there are positive ways in which we can utilize the resources in this world.
100%. Like, we need spiritual people to be the future politicians. We need spiritual people to be the most powerful entrepreneurs. We need spiritual people to be the next social media influencers. Help me out. Little bit. We need spiritual people to be in all of these positions. Martin Luther King said, the people who want peace in this world have to be as intelligent, as organized, and as hardworking as the people who want to create war. And therefore, a spiritualist doesn't turn away from all of these things, but a spiritualist says, I'm going to try and go in and make a change. And so, yeah, we need spiritual people in all walks of life.
Okay, so I'm going to open it up to the audience in a moment, but before that we're going to go to our second theme, which is about kind of habits and self-development. So how many of you would say you come to KC because you want to improve yourself as a person? Okay. The majority of us. How many of you would say you're coming to KC or spirituality to kind of find deeper truths in life? Okay, that seems to be most of us as well. How many of you come to KC for the free food at the end? Just me? So we're all trying to like improve as people. And I'm sure that many of you have either looked into or heard about these kind of self-development books. Things that come to mind are, this is not sponsored, Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, something like that. There's, Thinking Fast and Slow. So a lot of these books out there, they're telling us about how we can try and improve our life and develop ourselves. So coming back to Peterson's book, his massive thing is like clean your room. Because if you make a little change in your own personal room, then you'll be able to maybe make bigger changes in the world. And things like this. So they try and give you little tricks. I know that Thinking Fast and Slow talks about priming. So maybe you like to watch Netflix, but you also want to like go on the treadmill. So just do both at the same time. Or if you like to develop a certain habit, prime your brain such that every time you want to meditate, maybe you do it in a certain part of your room or something like that. So a lot of these self-development books, they kind of give you life hacks on how to improve. As a spiritualist, how am I meant to approach self-development? Am I meant to just try and develop my body physically by going to the gym? Am I meant to try out these little kind of life hacks that people are giving me? Or am I meant to do something deeper in cultivating myself and improving myself?
I talked about 3 questions which help you to understand what is spirituality. But then we could also say there's 3 fundamental questions which kind of drive what we do every single day. And those are the questions of why, how, and what. Most of the people and most of self-development is just dealing with how and what. In other words, they're helping you to improve what you do, and they're helping you to improve how you do it. And so, if you want to overcome anger, or if you want to be more disciplined, or if you want to control your temptation, then they'll give you the hows and the whats. And therefore, it helps, for sure. And we can use that, and it will definitely bring an improvement to your life, that's for sure. But what spirituality does is it really gets to the root of everything, because what it deals with is why. Nietzsche said, when your why is deep enough, then you can do any how and what. And therefore, spirituality is incredibly powerful because what it does is it helps you to get to your deepest why. And when you become so captivated, so enthused, so inspired, so motivated by the why, then what will happen is the how and the what will become much, much easier, and to some extent it will become pretty much automatic. And therefore we say the deepest and most sustainable type of self-development is spiritual development. Because through spirituality, when you understand what's beyond this life, what's beyond this world, what's beyond this body and mind, when you understand your spiritual essence, and therefore you understand your why, then you know how to live life, and you know what to do when you wake up every morning. And naturally then you develop yourself to the optimum level, and you become the best version of yourself. So what I would say is that self-development without spiritual development will inevitably stagnate at some point. And therefore the ultimate self-development is spiritual development.
That's quite counterintuitive because, like, I don't know about everyone else, but I often leave my work all the way to the deadline, and then all of a sudden I've got like a 4,000 word dissertation to write in 12 hours. And my question is always like, how can I, become more disciplined? But I guess if I ask why, that would make a massive difference. It seems though that the why is harder to find. So if I'm in university life, there's so many distractions, right? There's so many different easy forms of quick dopamine, and everyone else is doing this, and I'm not going to get these years back again. How am I meant to find that why when there's so many distractions around me in university?
Yeah, just coming back to your first point, it's basically what happens in life is we always try to shortcut and get something which will immediately help us now without getting to the root of it. It's like if you have to learn an instrument, then it's much easier just to kind of copy some notes so you can immediately play something, rather than sitting down and learning every single note for like 6 months. But if you do that, then eventually you can play anything. People don't want to ask the big questions in life because it takes time, it takes patience, it takes bravery, it takes courage. And it may not immediately change your life like something else may. But in the ultimate sense, it will give you the orientation which will help you to make every single decision and direction in your life. For me, how did I kind of begin walking that spiritual path and finding my why? I think it was 2 things. I think it was spiritual people, and I think it was spiritual books. I think those 2 simple things, by regularly interacting with people who are thinking about life in a much deeper way, and by regularly challenging yourself with ideas and philosophy and wisdom that makes you think about what you do when you make up in the morning and whether it's really worth your time and energy. I think when you expose yourself to those people and those books and that wisdom, then I think it starts becoming the most exciting and adventurous journey. Because what can be more fascinating than figuring out who you are and why you're here? I mean, it's the most compelling thing to grasp in life. But it just needs a kickstart. And once you're on that journey, you might find you become addicted.
I think you were mentioning 2 things. There's spiritual people and there's spiritual books. One spiritual book that many of us have heard of is the Bhagavad Gita. So it's this beautiful, interesting scene where there's a war going on, And sometimes we don't expect a kind of spiritual text to be discussed just before a war starts. But just before the culmination of that war, Arjun takes a moment to step back and ask Krishna about like these kind of deep questions in life. And then what follows is this beautiful discussion of karma and identity and purpose and navigating this world and so on. Could you share a few things about the Bhagavad Gita and maybe its impact in your life?
Yeah, the Bhagavad Gita, as you said, is an interesting scene. It's on a battlefield. And the battlefield is really, really interesting because on the battlefield, the immediate and the ultimate both become very, very important. And this point fascinated me about the Bhagavad Gita because I always felt that spirituality and how it was taught in the world was always about the afterlife. But in the Bhagavad Gita, what I found was an incredible philosophy which dealt with the immediate, what you're supposed to do when you wake up tomorrow morning, and a simultaneous philosophy which helped you to understand what's the ultimate, why am I here, and what happens after. And so Krishna on the battlefield is teaching Arjuna a philosophy which is applicable when you wake up tomorrow, and it's applicable on the final day of your life, and it's applicable in the afterlife. In other words, it's a philosophy which takes you through every single stage of your being. And in that way, in the Bhagavad Gita, I found that I was able to learn everything I needed to learn. How to make good decisions, how to avoid burnout, how to find your purpose, how to find love, how to avoid temptation, how to overcome mistakes. It's kind of like the ultimate guide in spiritual self-development. And so, yeah, I started reading it, whatever that was, like 30 years ago, over 30 years ago. And I still read it, like practically not a day or two goes by without coming back to that book. And so, yeah, it's an incredibly powerful book of wisdom and has eternal truths, timeless truths, which can empower every facet of life.
You mentioned love. But of course, you're living with people all the time. When you're in the monastery, you're dealing with people. When you come to events like this, you're having to interact with people. I think that something that we often find as students is social pressures, right? Relationships that you're meant to maintain with your friends, maybe with colleagues, maybe if you're networking or something like that for your career. These kind of relationships, they pull us differently in different ways. Now, if I'm trying to go on a spiritual journey and I'm trying to improve myself, if I'm trying to take these principles and live them in my life, having friendships and relationships where maybe the other person isn't actually as spiritually driven as myself or seems to have different approaches to life, that seems to be a difficult thing to navigate, if they have more material goals and I maybe have slightly different goals. How can I maintain social relationships and friendships while being a spiritualist myself? Or is it not possible?
I think the first thing is that it's not that some people are spiritual and some people are not. I think according to the Bhagavad Gita at least, and all spiritual traditions, we're all spiritual beings. It's just that we're all at different stages of understanding that and embracing that. And so I think the first thing is that where someone is doesn't define who they are. And therefore, I think a really important principle in relationships is always see the potential, always see the good, always see where you can make connection and what you can appreciate. I have plenty of people who aren't as spiritually involved as me, but I learn so many things from them that sometimes I don't even learn from my fellow monks. And therefore we can learn something and we can be nourished in our journey by anyone at whatever stage of spiritual evolution they're at. And I think that's important to understand. And then I would say, in every relationship, you have to make a decision. I would say my general rule in relationships in the world is I never shut the door on any relationship. But what I do is at any given time in a relationship, I try to understand how much prospect of development is there in this relationship. And where there's high prospect, then I invest more time in those relationships. And then certain relationships where I feel at this time it's not really going to move forward or progressively, then I don't shut the door or cut that relationship off, but I may just not give it as much attention at this moment in time. And then maybe come back to it later on in the future when there is an option, an opportunity. And so I think with relationships, often we're too impulsive. And we just tend to just like either go like all in, or we just like go like cold turkey and like completely cut it. Where I think there's just room to say that some relationships just need like some time, breathing space, and we'll come back later.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to open it up to the audience now. So we're going to have discussions about these topics, spiritualizing, career stuff, finding purpose in university amidst distractions, and also understanding how you can truly develop yourself, develop these good habits with a spiritual purpose. So do we have a microphone that we're going to...
Okay, you can shout out and then we can.
Thank you so much for your talk and your wisdom.
Thank you.
I'm really intrigued by what you just said about relationships. And I wonder if you feel that it can apply to romantic relationships, like committed romantic relationships. If I think back about my recent experience, I feel like I probably displayed that behavior you just described of being impulsive and breaking off cold turkey. Yeah. And I'm wondering if there would have been a possibility. I'm starting to think there might have been to take some space and reflect and then come back. I wonder what you think about that.
He asks the celibate monk. Of course, I'm an authority on this subject. I think whether it's a romantic relationship or whether it's any other relationship of love that we have, that principle stands true. At different times in a relationship, there may be different things that each individual is going through. And therefore, those things sometimes stop us from connecting deeply. Therefore, what you'll find is that patience, tolerance, humility, acceptance, these are the buzzwords actually in a relationship. We tend to think it's all about chemistry, it's all about attraction, it's all about, that kind of wow factor that makes a relationship. When in reality, deep relationships are formed on all the other things that are often underrated. Chemistry may bring two people together, but it's commitment, sacrifice, acceptance, tolerance, humility, all of those things I mentioned, that's actually going to help you to connect on a deep level. So I would say, whether it's a romantic relationship or any relationship, the depth of it is going to be determined by how much commitment and all of those qualities that I just mentioned are factored into the connection. And so, I would say every relationship is valuable. Every human connection that you make in this life is extremely valuable. And therefore, it would be, I think, very unwise to waste any of those connections. And it would be very wise to try to maximize each one of them, but that requires patience.
Do we have any other questions? Yeah.
I wanted to ask, when pursuing things that bring difficulties, for example, a career path or relationships and friendships, how do we know whether the difficulties are bringing us closer to our why and our purpose, and whether it's good to go through that resistance or whether we're just going through the resistance forcefully and it's actually bringing us further away from our why and also what our nature and what we're supposed to do?
In this life, you have to endeavor to achieve anything. But there's a point where endeavor becomes over-endeavor. In life, if you want to achieve something, you have to face obstacles. But there's a point where you're going on a path where there's so many obstacles where it's almost like you're beginning now to hit your head against a brick wall and you're trying to go somewhere that you're not meant to go. So the $64 million question is that how do you know when that point comes where you're maybe meant to say, this is not my path, or this is not what I'm meant to be doing? Generally, what will happen is endeavor turns into over-endeavor. You'll be able to know by a few things. The first thing is if your mental and physical health begins to decline. If you're trying to do something and you're coming across so many difficulties, so many obstacles, or you're trying so hard that it's causing your physical and mental health to decline, then probably it's not meant to be your journey. The second way that you'll know that the journey is maybe not meant to be your journey is if the result of that endeavor and those difficulties, your relationships and your sense of connection with people around you is declining. That's a classic sign that you're going on a path which is maybe not meant to be your purpose. And the third thing is that when you go on a path and you're endeavoring and it's coming to a point where you're now getting into the zone of over-endeavor and it's maybe time to say, like, this is not. The third way you'll be able to know is because your sense of spiritual orientation, you'll begin losing sight of the bigger picture. What will happen is you'll become so fixated in achieving something that you'll lose sight of the bigger reason why you're even trying to do that. And so you'll find this often happens with people, that they get so attached to doing something that maybe there's not meant to be done by them. And then what happens is they get so into it that they lose sight of why they even begun that journey in the first place. So these are three ways in which you can generally tell. Your physical and mental health will go down, your relationships will decline, and you'll lose sight of the bigger picture. And when that happens, you may need to start thinking that maybe I need to be doing something else.
Any more? I see over there. Yep. Yes.
What is the stick?
What's the stick for? Oh, right, yeah. I was hoping someone would ask me that, yeah. So this is the stick of a renunciate. So when I was 21, I graduated from UCL and I became a monk. And when you become a monk, then the first stage of monastic life is known in Sanskrit as brahmacharya. So that's a student life of a monk. So you study, you learn all of those things I was saying, self-control, mind control, all of those things. And then what happens is, for most people, after living a period of life as a monk, maybe 1 year, 2 years, some 5 years, generally people make a transition back into the real world. And that's basically the journey for most monks. But certain monks may decide to embrace renunciation for the entirety of their life. And when they do that and make that decision, then they enter like the second stage of monastic life, which is known as sannyas. And that's where you make a lifelong vow of renunciation. So when you make the lifelong vow of renunciation, then you become a Swami, and it's called the final vow, because you close all the doors and you say, I'm not going to do anything else in my life now. It's just, there's one thing that I'm trying to achieve and one thing only. And when we take up that vow, then we get a stick. And the stick is made up of bamboo sticks. Bamboo is very beautiful. Its flutes are made from bamboo, and it's said that when the wind goes through the bamboo, then it makes a beautiful sound. So one of the reasons why the monks hold a bamboo stick is said to that the sound which then emanates from their mouth should soothe people's souls. In other words, they should share wisdom with kindness, with compassion, with relevance. And so the stick is made of bamboo. There's 4 sticks in there, 3 sticks. And the 3 sticks represent the mind, the body, and the words. And so it's said for the first 10 years, after one makes their lifelong vows of monasticism, then we carry this for 10 years. And it's meant to remind us that we've dedicated to utilizing our mind, body, and words in serving God and serving the world, like that. And it's good for self-defense.
Yes.
You say to not close the door in any relationship and any person. Let's say you have someone who keeps breaking your trust and breaks your principles. So you decide to put space and distance between them, it's been months or years, whatever. Either you decide to reach out, or they decide to reach out to you. And you find out they still haven't changed, so you put more distance, and the process keeps repeating. Do you eventually just say, I've had enough, I'm not going to talk to that person, or do you keep on just putting distance? What do you do?
Thank you so much, yeah. I think some relationships just require distance. The reason I said not to cut off any relationship is because what happens is when you cut off a relationship, then there's a certain amount of negativity, bitterness, anger, frustration that you hold in your heart. And as our heart and as our mind and as our being is hijacked by that negativity, then it means we're not able to see the beauty that's going on in our life. And therefore, if someone constantly breaks your trust, you're not going to be foolhardy. You're not just going to keep giving people another chance. At the same time, you're not going to cut them off and excommunicate them and feel that bitterness and anger, because that is also going to create a negative impression in your consciousness. And therefore, what we encourage people to do is just let that relationship be, keep a deeper distance. And if at some point that person shows up and has changed, then we're willing for a relationship. And just having that openness to forgive, means that your conscience will be clear. The goal of life is not to remember all the terrible things that someone did to you. The goal of life is to remember the beauty that's present in our life every single day. But we can't allow other people and their misbehavior to then hijack our own sense of well-being. And that's why it's good not to cut relationships, because we might think we're creating a solution, but what's happening is we're holding a negativity. Whereas when you keep the relationship open, that room for forgiveness means that your conscience is more clear. Does that make sense?
Thank you so much. One of the things you said that interested me was how we can be a spiritualist in the real world and succeed in the real world while still maintaining that, which I find interesting because, some other religions will tell you that the world is so evil and that we should try and avoid it if we want to be a spiritualist. My question on that is, we know if we want to be a spiritualist slightly more and we want to understand the bigger picture, and I come to events like this and I feel motivated and inspired, yet when you go further down, you go back into normal life and university life, there are things for me personally, things which taking yourself away from that spiritual life, partying or meeting people maybe you shouldn't meet up with. My question is that attraction of those activities, they're so strong sometimes, and consciously it's taking you away from the bigger picture. How do we approach those things? Do we try them and give them a go to get it out of our system? Because that attraction to those tasks are so great, even though necessarily it might not be contributing to the bigger picture, and that's just something I would like advice on.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, it's said that we learn in 3 ways. One person will learn just by hearing. Another person, along with hearing, they need to observe. And another person, along with hearing and observing, they need to experience. First-class intelligence means just to learn by hearing, because if you have to go through an experience, then it's kind of painful, because you have to experience it all, and the school of hard knocks. So, but at the same time, we have to be honest. We have to be authentic. And therefore, my advice to students, because that's what happened in my own journey, I came to UCL, I kind of begun my spiritual journey about 15 or 16 years old, reading spiritual books. By the time I was 18, I started at university, and I was staying in Ramsey Hall. And here I was on the spiritual journey and a fresher at UCL. And so, yeah, I did go out a few times. And looking back, yeah, maybe it did help me, because maybe I saw the superficiality of that. I saw the false promises of that. I saw people trying hard, really trying hard to have a good time, in all sincerity. But maybe not experiencing as much as they would have liked to. And maybe that gave me a different type of realization of what I was reading in the Bhagavad Gita. So, do what you need to do. But if you're wise, then you'll be able to learn a lot just by hearing and observing. And if you become a really expert observer of life, then what you'll find is that you won't actually need to experience it for yourself. Because if you become thoughtful and reflective and perceptive in your heart, you'll already know the answer, that there's just certain things I don't need to waste my time trying out.
Yes, thank you very much. What is, in your opinion, the correct way to view death and deal with the pressure of its inevitability?
Wow. Moving swiftly on to the light questions. Well, you may have heard Steve Jobs' famous speech to the Stanford graduates, where he says, every day when I wake up, I ask myself, if today was the final day, would I be doing what I'm doing today? And if the answer is no for too many days in a row, then I know I need to change something. He goes on to say that death is life's greatest change agent. When I was a young monk, still young, when I was a younger monk, I used to jump at the opportunity to go to funerals. As monks, it's part of what we do. It was like, there's a funeral happening, I want to go. I was like, why do you like going to funerals so much? But I just found going to funerals and seeing the temporality of life just helped to put everything back into perspective. When you come face to face with death, you can't live life in the same way. They say at the crematorium, at a funeral, everyone's a philosopher. Therefore, in Eastern culture, death is not sanitized, sterilized, and sealed off from public view. In Eastern culture, you see death before your eyes. In Eastern culture, when someone dies, there's a funeral, and the funeral is open pyre, and you see a body burning in front of you. And now some people might think that's morbid, but the idea is that understanding that we have a limited amount of time in this world makes us live life with so much more purpose, so much more urgency, so much more clarity, and so much more humility. And so, for spiritualists, death is the ultimate meditation that brings everything back into perspective. And so, I think you should meditate on death every single day. Because definitely it will make us live life in a very different way.
You say to ask the big questions, to see the bigger picture. To what extent do you believe that there are objective answers to those questions? And to what extent do you think that there are some matters that everyone has to answer for their own?
The Bhagavad Gita, our spiritual teacher, presented not so much as a religion, but as a spiritual science. The Bhagavad Gita, according to the sages who present it, presents a hypothesis about life, that we're non-material beings, that there's a non-material reality, and that there's a process by which we can connect and rediscover that nature. The scriptures then go on to offer an experiment, practices, lifestyle, mindsets, habits, ways of living by which one can actually begin to perceive that spiritual reality. And then the scriptures say there's an observation, there's a conclusion. There are directly perceivable changes in one's own life, character, consciousness that one will be able to observe, which show that this spiritual connection is being made and this spiritual realization is being awakened. And so we would say that the Bhagavad Gita is not something you have to believe in, but rather it's a higher dimensional science, and that the spiritual truths which are presented within it can actually be directly perceived, but they have to be perceived by elevated consciousness. And in order to experience that elevated consciousness, one has to go through a conscious spiritual experiment. And so we would say it's a science, but it's a higher dimensional science. If you want to perceive spiritual phenomena, you can't do it using materialistic or material instrument. For example, if I give you a thermometer and I say, this is a scientific instrument, now can you weigh this piece of wood with it? You say, well, it's a scientific instrument, but it's not designed for that. In other words, if you want to prove something, then you have to use the right type of instrumentation. So when people say, is there any objective way to prove spiritual reality? What they're really saying is, can I prove spiritual reality through a materialistic methodology? And I would say that's as fallacious as saying, can you weigh a piece of wood with a thermometer? Because yes, it's a scientific instrument, but it's not designed for that. So, the proposition of the Eastern teachers is that spirituality is directly perceivable through elevation, purification, and refinement of one's own consciousness. And that is done through techniques of meditation, yoga, and so on and so forth. Yeah?
I just wanted to ask, how do we get rid of the fear of death when there are like people relying on me? For example, like if I were to die like tomorrow, how do I like not worry about others, what will happen to them? What's your advice?
When we understand that we're not the ones in control, when we understand that there's a higher power, that there's a higher benevolent intelligence behind this universe who's compassionately providing for everyone, when we have that deep faith, when we have that deep realization of that Supreme Being, then we know that when we are not able to control situations, we know that there's someone beyond me who is controlling it. And therefore there's no sense of insecurity, there's no sense of disappointment, there's no sense of frustration, because one knows that there's someone more powerful, more knowledgeable, and more compassionate who's working beyond me. And if they have a plan which is different to my plan, then their plan is probably better. And therefore, let me just go with that. And so the only real way to overcome fear is to understand that nothing in this world is happening by chance. It's happening by someone who's my best friend. Yeah.
I think in one of your talks you spoke about live options, in that one would be in a way foolish not to take up things that are both that they've observed to be beneficial, maybe experienced to be beneficial and is convenient. What would you advise to someone that might say, I'm happy, I don't need to do that, or maybe has even tried it and not seen the benefits of it and then therefore discarded it?
Okay, yeah. So just to frame it for those of you who may not be aware, there was an American psychologist, William James, and he said, in life there could be many options, but not every option is a live option. Something is a live option if it's practical. You can do it today without any kind of negative repercussions. Number two, it's a live option if it's beneficial. It has logical intrinsic value. By doing it, you'll get some benefit from it. And number three, it's probable. People have done it in the past and it's worked, and there's good reason to believe it could work for you. So he says, if something is practical, if it's beneficial, and if it's probable, it's a live option, and you'd be silly not to at least try it out and give it a go. So now if someone says, I'm already happy in my life, and I don't need to try anything else. I don't need any options. I'm kind of doing good already. I would say to them that I don't think happiness is a yes or no. It can increase by superlative degrees. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you you're not happy. But what I am going to do is say that there could be ways to be even happier. Now, if I'm giving you an option which is practical, you can do it today. You're not going to lose anything by doing it. It's beneficial because I'm offering you a higher level of happiness. And it's probable because there are people who are experiencing beyond the material and reporting that it's giving them much higher levels of joy. And it's not just them reporting that visibly in their life, you can see they're acting in such a way which shows detachment from the material things that everyone else is running around for. Why would you not try it? I mean, we try everything, so why not try that? You have nothing to lose, right? We are not asking people to have blind faith. But what we're also saying is don't have blind doubt. Because blind faith in the wrong thing is bad, but blind doubt in something that can give you incredible benefit could be just as, if not more, dangerous. And therefore, our point is no blind doubt, no blind faith, but just try things with an open mind and see.
And then for someone, let's use the example of me trying to get my mom to shop. If she's tried it and it's still maybe due to impatience, but hasn't reaped those benefits from it in that short period of time it was tried, what would you advise them?
So what about if someone does the spiritual experiment but they don't get anything out of it?
Yeah.
Obviously they did it wrong. I think we have to respect people. We have to respect their experience. We have to respect that they gave it a try. We may want to give feedback if we observe something in them by which they could do the experiment in a better way. Life will make everyone question. Everyone will encounter experiences in life which will necessarily make them trigger a certain questioning and curiosity. And therefore, I think if someone tries it, it doesn't work, I don't think we just have to let them go on their journey and wait till a time comes when they might be open again to trying. Yes?
Do you think it's possible to be happy with a rich spiritual life and rich friendships without having romantic relationships? And if it's possible, how you get to a point where you are satisfied with those things without wanting a romantic relationship?
Feels like a targeted question.
You're asking a celibate monkey. We live in a world in which I think romance is overrated. Whenever we talk about love, we always think about romantic love. Love is so much more than just romantic love. For most people, it's natural to want to have companionship. I don't think that's a weakness. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think that makes you spiritually less accomplished. But that romantic relationship has to be based on something deeper than the physical and the emotional. If it's simply based on physical and emotional, it will cause a lot of pain at some point in the journey. that's inevitable. When we deeply connect with someone, knowing that we're both spiritual beings on a spiritual journey, and that somehow we've come together because we have something to contribute to each other's journey, and instead of trying to take from the other, we see our role in the relationship as service and contribution and empowering each other to become the best we can, then those kind of relationships actually catapult us to our greatest potential. So I would say, yes, you can have those relationships. They don't have to be material, they don't have to be painful. But if you feel your journey is a journey in which you don't feel you want to have that kind of companionship, I think that's also totally fine. But for most people, it's generally more natural to have that companionship. Yeah, I don't know how we're doing for time.
We've got time for maybe 2-3 more questions, that's it.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
This is a response to what you just said, or a clarification question. So you don't think without spiritual alignment it's possible to have a healthy, long-term relationship with things? So, for example, if I was on a spiritual journey, my partner was an atheist, let's say, do you think it would not be possible for this relationship to have a long-term future?
I think there are plenty of people who are non-spiritual in that sense, who have lifelong relationships, dedicate themselves to another person, serve each other beautifully. But at one point in the relationship, there will be pain. And the ultimate painful end is that we're separated by time and space. And if our vision of each other is simply the physical and emotional, then at that point the relationship breaks. And that's painful. I was on a flight coming into Stockholm. So I came into the plane, and there's always that moment on the plane where you're like, who's going to be sitting next to me? So I sat down. Anyway, then this lady came up, and she just sat down next to me, and she was kind of super serious, and she looked at me and she goes, "I'm a lawyer." I was like, okay. And then she said, and I've been watching some of your Instagram reels, and some of them are good, but I don't agree with a lot of what you have to say. So I looked at her, I said, "You're a lawyer, it's your job to argue." Anyway, then we had a good conversation on the flight. And then as we were landing in Stockholm, I turned to her and I said, I'm just about to give a talk on the science of letting go at Stockholm University. Have any tips for me? And she looked back at me and a teardrop fell from her eye. And she said, "The science of letting go." She goes, "No, I haven't learned that science yet. My husband died 10 years ago and I still can't live with that." So, when we relate to each other on the level of the body and the mind, it will be painful at one point, either in the journey of that relationship in this life, or at the point when that relationship breaks by the waves of time. But when we connect with each other on a spiritual level, then we connect in a much deeper way, a way which transcends even the limitations of space and time. And that's what I mean by when I say that if you connect on the physical and emotional, it will cause pain at some point.
Sort of adding on to that question, does being in a romantic relationship sort of affects your solitude and isolation? And if so, is this, what is the effect of this?
That's basically what happens. Most people in the world today are scared of being alone, and therefore they rush to try to be in a relationship. I was mentioning at the beginning of this talk that in spiritual culture, everyone lives as a monk in the beginning of their life. And the idea is that before you can deeply connect with anyone, if you spend time in solitude, if you spend time understanding yourself, if you spend time actually becoming self-aware, if you spend time becoming happy with your own company, then what will happen is when you then come out to have a relationship with someone, you'll actually be able to deeply connect with them. How can you deeply connect with someone if we don't actually even understand ourselves properly? And so oftentimes exactly what you're saying happens, that people don't know how to embrace solitude, people don't know how to be with themselves, people really lack a sense of self-awareness, and therefore they just jump into relationships thinking that that's going to solve everything, and it ends up becoming more painful. And so solitude is a very, very beautiful thing, because it actually sets you up almost counterintuitively. Solitude is what sets you up to actually deeply connect with others.
So, I don't know, would you say there is a limit of how much solitude is healthy?
Yeah, the goal of life is not to be in solitude. The goal of life is to experience love. And so solitude is not an end. Solitude is a means to the end. The real purpose of life is to have loving relationships. But loving relationships not simply on the physical and the emotional, loving relationships on the spiritual. But in order to achieve that level of connection, some time in solitude, for a period of your life. So what I tell people is that you should be in solitude for a period of your life. Every year, you should be in solitude for a few weeks. Every month, you should try and be in solitude for a day. And every day, there should be even an hour that you're in solitude. So, I don't know what kind of image you get when you think of solitude. Like, I don't mean like in a, locked up in a cell or something like that, But just, I mean, away. Yeah, away from society, away from the opinions, the expectations, the trends, the traditions, the normal noises around you. A place where you can get away from all of that noise and just think. If you do that for a period of your life, if you do that for a period of your year, if you do that for a period every month, and if you do that sometime every day, you will be a different person. You will live on a significantly higher level. But people just don't know the art of how to be alone anymore. Put your phone away for one day and see what that does to your consciousness. Try it. I dare you.
Okay, we're going to have to, unfortunately, call it there. I'm so sorry. You'll be able to ask more questions over food, and if you speak to the Swami later. I think just to wrap up a few of the important points, the first thing that comes to mind is your correction on my comment about the real world. And maybe there is something more that we're missing out. Spirituality as being something that's beyond life, beyond the world, and beyond the mind and body. And a spiritualist doesn't just have to disconnect from this world, but can also go back into the world and use the world for service. So that's quite a profound point, I think. On top of that, another point that you mentioned was about when we're looking at self-development, we need spiritual development there, because spiritual development provides the kind of the why or the foundation. And often in life we're looking at how to do things, but not necessarily why we're doing things. And so if we look for the purpose that instills in us, I think you quoted Nietzsche, saying that, you know, when the why is so strong, you'll figure out how to get things done. And of course, coming to the issue of university, distractions, you were saying maybe it's sometimes you can try the experience, but those who are slightly more perceptive and thoughtful, they'll be able to learn from the lessons of others, and they won't have to go through those painful experiences themselves. And a lot of our final discussion, especially in the questions, focused on relationships. And I think the main points were that we shouldn't just cut off this relationships in general. We shouldn't just be binary in our dealings with them. We don't have to be all in or cold turkey. But we can just see and be more open, so make room for forgiveness, connect deeper on a spiritual level. And in doing so, recognize that if we understand our self-awareness developed through solitude, then we can also cultivate strong relationships once we also understand who we are. So with that, I'd like to thank Keshava Swami. Can we have a round of applause?